The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Brian for Breaking Down Security. Just me for this episode. Wanted to give Miss Berlin, Mr. Betcher some time, and we've got a lot going on in the infosec space, and there's a lot going on out in the real world too, to be fair. But I've got an interview this week, very special interview, somebody we've wanted on for a long time. She's very active in infosec community, and I enjoy every one of her tweets that I see her. It's Alyssa Miller. Welcome.
Hey there. How are you?
Pretty good. I did say Alyssa. Yes. Is that correct?
I think you did. I hope that's what I heard. So
I have a penchant for not saying people's names correctly. So, and it's a problem. So, thank you for coming on the show. To be honest, and I said, in our show notes, I had a tweet in here from 2019 when you gave a talk at Diana Initiative, and I was like, we need to have her on. And I don't know what happened, but the time got away from us, and I finally came out that we could get you on, and I appreciate you joining me this week.
Yeah, I'm super excited, and I mean, come on, there's like a few people in the infosec industry, so take some time to get through them. But very happy to be here.
Very cool. All right, so for those of the people in the world who may not know who you are, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I introduce myself usually as a hacker, a security advocate, author, blogger, public speaker, of course. I've been in security professionally for 15 years, but as I tell people, I've been a hacker all my life. I was that little kid who took all my toys apart, like to figure out how they worked. That blew up into technology at the age of 12 when I bought my first computer and taught myself how to program. And funny thing is I just never saw it being a career until I took 3 semesters of pre-med and decided that college level chemistry was not for me. And I had to get into something else, got into computer science, became a programmer, did that for a number of years, and sort of fell into the security scene as a pen tester. But yeah, since then I've been in the consulting world for a number of years. And most recently, I just started working for an organization named Sneak. And we create, developer tools that help enable security and devSecOps development. And I'm a security advocate for them. So it's really my role to get out in the community, like as if I wasn't doing that enough already, get out and do public speaking, get out, author blogs, author reports, do all the fun stuff that I really enjoy doing.
Very cool. So Sneak, huh? What, is that spelled like the action Sneak, or is it something else?
No, it's spelled SNYK, and there's actually some debate even internally in the organization as to how you pronounce it. But
I just called it Sync.
SNYK. So it's either Sneak or Snick, but it's Sneak. It's just our folks in London who typically will call it Snick.
Okay, SNYK. Oh, okay. Very cool. Very nice. Yeah. We actually talked about that on Slack just recently. Somebody was looking for an open source dependency tool that they could look at, and they were actually looking at evaluating y'all. So that's pretty cool. All right, so we've got a number of topics that we've agreed on and we've talked about, and one of the things was I actually did want to talk about your 60-year cycle of bad strategies that you gave at Diana Initiative. Before the show, we started talking about how people design things, and I have used the analogy of an egg, a coconut, or a brick. In terms of when I'm talking to customers about, why it's important to be secure both throughout. Why you said 60-year cycle, so that puts us about 1960. They're about 1960. What was it about 1960 that makes this a 60-year cycle?
Yeah, so if you look at it, was actually 1961. In November 1961, there were researchers at MIT actually launched the first password protected system. So they had a old IBM system they called CTSS, compatible time sharing system. And basically what they wanted to do was you had this great this IBM system with a console, but they wanted to enable multiple users to be able to use it. But they also wanted to be able to limit their amount of time, because especially back in those days, processor time was a big deal. And so they wanted to limit everybody to 4 hours. So they created user IDs and passwords. You had to log into the system. Well, not surprisingly to anyone these days, the first password breach happened 5 months later when a grad student, decided he wanted more than 4 hours of time to do his computations. And he started digging around in the system, figured out he could print off the password file. So Friday night, he printed it off. He got the full file of usernames and passwords. He was even smart. This is like true hacker stuff. Like, he didn't want to get caught. So what did he do? He handed out some of that information to other people so they could use it as well. So that way he was, it was untraceable who it was that was actually doing this, because you had so many people who had access to these user IDs and passwords. But the metaphor I use and why I say it starts there is you look at that like, okay, they wanted to defend the system. So where did they defend it? Well, they went to the perimeter, which at that time was the console, and they defended the console, put a username and password on it. But once you were in, things like, oh yeah, the password file, which might be a little critical, everybody had full access to, because, oh, nobody's going to figure that out, or whatever they were thinking. And we see that all the way along. We fast forward from there 30 years to the 90s. We launched this cool, wonderful thing called the internet to the public space. And suddenly companies are all connecting their corporate networks to this internet thing. And so what do we do to defend them? We stick a firewall out there at the perimeter. Everything inside the network is still wide open, but we're defending that perimeter from those outside attackers. And then you come forward another 30 years, we're still doing it. What are we talking about now? We're talking about the end user. We got to defend the end user. You need endpoint security. You need antivirus. You need MFA. All great things that absolutely are a part of a defense in-depth strategy. And yet what do we see? S3 buckets end up out there exposed. We see someone breaches a computer on a network, and suddenly they're able to traverse the whole network and find their way to critical data. And so yeah, the talk that I gave, I called it Inside Out Security, because really it talked about a complete strategy shift using the metaphor of medieval castles. So when they built a medieval castle, what they did was they started with this huge monolithic structure in the middle that was all well fortified. They called it the keep. Everything they cared about went inside the keep. And then from there, they started building concentric defenses around it: walls, moats, drawbridges, archers on walls, knights who, would go out and address a threat, cannons later on, all these things that they put out, but they built them out in layers. And if you look at like an aerial view of a medieval castle, like Dover Castle is a really good example, you see this, and you see 3, 4, 5 concentric walls built out, but it all started at this keep that was built on top of a hill. So the question is, why don't we do that with our data assets or our business assets? Like, look at what it is that's most important to you, and then build your defenses around that, strong defenses there, and then build out from there. And so that's what we keep hoping. Maybe we can get to a point that that's how we start designing our defenses in general.
Right. So in your case, you said you want to build the keep. So thinking of it as Winterfell, you've got the circles and the hills, and I've seen castles where it's like you've got to go up a ramp because you've got the high ground at that point. What in terms of assets are you talking about? Are you talking about like your database information, or any? how do you classify what's important and what isn't in your environment? There's so much information and there's so many applications. What would you consider a good guideline for what you consider as critical for the nucleus, if you will, to build out from that?
Sure. So that's where, and in that talk, I share this too, is bring it back to the business, right? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what our IT assets are. We don't care about that application. We care about what that application is enabling within our business, right? If it's a customer facing 24/7 application and that's the core of our business, that's probably something that's really, really, really important to us. If it's, some web facing project management application that really just kind of serves a purpose for, as we have new projects, people can share information back and forth. That's probably not so critical. It's not a core element of our business. And you can think about it to expand beyond the idea of IT assets. What's really important to us? The data that we hold oftentimes is core to our business. The ability just to deliver a critical service is oftentimes a critical asset. You think about, just your, utilities or whatnot, or healthcare, the ability to actually deliver care to a patient. So thinking about it, starting there, and the IT assets then that feed that, and then now you can start to group that together, and now you understand what it is that you actually need to consolidate defenses around, and then you can build those out.
Okay. So one of the things that I'm dealing with my customer, I call them the first party, because I don't want to mention who they are. They have a lot of integrations. They have data, and they will either share it or they will ingest that data from other organizations, effectively moving the security boundary. How do you defend when your castle has a keep and another place where your castle has two keeps in this case, so except that keep is in another person's castle? How do you effectively defend both of these using that I'm just trying to figure out how we would, with the expanding boundaries and stuff, and sharing and integrations, how would help defend against that?
Sure. Yeah, of course. And that's crucial, right? I mean, it does no good. I used to joke about the infosec utopia being a room full of computers that no one had access to and had no internet or no network connections, right? I mean, that'd be ideal from an infosec perspective, but completely useless. So again, going back to thinking about those castles, yeah, they're two separate castles. And what did you have, that allowed access to those castles? Well, you had the bridges, you had the, a drawbridge, you had moats and bridges across the moats, you had guarded entries that were then, you built defenses around that. And so where I talk about some of those defenses, I talk about them in terms like three categories. So you've got kind of those detection defenses, right? Which are the things that's like your watchmen on the towers. They're just there to see, is there a threat coming? And I kind of, there was a commercial last year going around about I think it was like a privacy monitoring tool or something. Oh, I'm just the monitor. Well, yeah, you have those defenses that are just detection. That's all they're going to do is tell you something bad's happening. They're not going to do anything about it. Then you have this idea of mitigation defenses. And I kind of liken this to like your moats or those really long yards between walls. That all those are meant to do is give you time and space to respond. So when you think about things like network segmentation, for instance, could somebody, once they're inside your network, they're probably going to start to look to try to traverse, and they're going to attack your different defenses. But if you want to have those layers in between, where at least now you have the ability to detect that something has happened, you have the time and that space to respond to the attack that's occurring before it's ultimately able to reach your critical assets. And then third and final, you've got those active prevention defenses, right? Now, so these are like the knights or the archers on the walls or the cannons that I talked about before, right? They're the things that are actively going to fight back against that threat and stop that threat before it reaches your critical infrastructure. And so when we think about in terms of those integrations, it's making sure we have those same 3 layers of defense at those integration points as anywhere else. So we're not simply assuming that, oh, well, the drawbridge is down and that person's walking through, they must be okay.
Right. That kind of actually brings us to one part that we wanted to talk about was threat modeling in this case. So, you've got, like you said, 2 different castles. You're working, with other engaged, other companies, other vendors and that kind of thing. You're having to figure out what is the nucleus of your company or the most vital assets in your organization. I would imagine something like threat modeling or incident response tabletops or something like that would be something that would help you. Those are the tools that you would need to help you understand all of that.
Yeah, so I am a big proponent of threat modeling. I have been for years. I absolutely love it. First of all, to me, threat modeling is one of the most critical activities that is least often used in development organizations. And it's obviously with the introduction of like devSecOps, it's gotten worse. I tell the story in one of my talks about being at a customer who actually had a pretty good threat modeling program, right? So they had, it was pretty regular. It was standardized how they did it. They had streamlined the process down to where ultimately it probably took about 4 man hours of time to do. So it consisted of some preparatory work, creating some diagrams, answering some questionnaires, and then sitting down in a meeting of a number of different people and talking through it and whatever, and thinking about it in terms of threats. And the thing I remember was doing one of these for them and walking out of the room, and the developer who was in there, so as a senior architect, comes up to me and we were kind of talking, and he says something to me about, I can't wait until we're done with this. We're switching over to DevOps and building a pipeline for DevOps, and we're not going to have to do this anymore. I looked, what do you mean? Why wouldn't you? Well, it's DevOps. It's it's going to be CI/CD. We're going to be moving quick. We can't spend half a day or more going through this threat modeling exercise. And it kind of struck me, and I realized that this is, when we think about threat modeling, we do think about it as a pretty heavyweight operation. You look at some of the methodologies that are out there, and they call for creating these data flow diagrams that map data flows through the entire application, and architecture diagrams that map out where controls are and everything else. And then you sit down and you categorize your threats according to stride, and then you build these attack vector maps and all this stuff. And if you really sit down and you do that for an entire application, that's a pretty heavyweight process. And so I think what's happening is we're seeing, especially as we move into this DevOps or DevSecOps culture, people have really kind of let threat modeling just go by the wayside. It was never, I would never call it a well-implemented solution as far as like being pervasive in the first place, and it's getting worse now.
Right. Well, so it is weighty, right? But once it's done, it really only has to be updated periodically, right? I mean, when we did threat modeling, we did IR tabletops where I used to work at before I started working here at Leviathan. We spent 2 days on 3 different scenarios, and then we would update the documentation and everything. But once we got through the first scenario, the other 2 scenarios were quite a bit easier, because at some point everything kind of, it's all like a pyramid. Everything goes up to smaller and smaller. And, at some point you're going to, reach out to the public relations folks, or you're going to reach out to the media folks, or, the process is all going to funnel at some point to, specific organizations in your company. When it starts, you were saying before we got started here, you wanted to push threat modeling as far left as possible in the DevOps, process. What does that look like if a security person, let's say, is not involved with this? How do we get Or, they have a very, light touch security people. How do we get developers to want to do these things or, update them when, like you showed very eloquently with your example there, the guy doesn't even want to do things like, it sounds like he doesn't want to even do documentation of his sprints and stuff. So how do we get them to want to do that? Do we just need to make it part of the process? Do we need to reach out to PMs? Do we need to reach out to functional management and go, look, these things need to be done? How do we make this a thing?
So there's a couple things here, right? First of all, just taking a step back and thinking about what is threat modeling really for. And this is something, when I start talking threat modeling, this is always something I want to get to because I show the examples of different people's definitions, whether it's OWASP or Microsoft or Wikipedia. You can go out and you do a search, you'll get tons of really lengthy, really difficult to understand. Even the explanations of threat modeling are super heavyweight. Like it's crazy. But when you sit down and you really think about it, the root of what threat modeling is to identify what is it that could possibly go wrong so that we can inform development to create the right controls to address those threats. That's the heart of threat modeling. So now when we think about DevOps and devSecOps, we have to think about what does that really mean? And like I kind of mentioned before, it's a culture shift, right? DevSecOps is all about, we've got this shared responsibility where we've brought developers and security and operational disciplines together. And as a group, we are all responsible for ultimately delivering secure code that's stable and it can be delivered quickly. That's the end responsibility of everybody that's involved. Security is responsible for not just making sure it's secure, but making sure it's stable and that it gets delivered fast, just like everybody else. So what we're always trying to do in DevSecOps is provide that easy, frictionless path from the start of development clear to delivery for the developers. So putting a heavyweight threat model in there where they've got to draw diagrams and they got to do all these things that otherwise wouldn't be a part of their development cycle becomes something that's very hard to get them to adopt. So I look at it as, well, how do we get better today than we were yesterday? Let's just think about it. We talk about continuous integration, continuous delivery. What about just continuous improvement? And so what I've started to propose is this idea of how do we push farther left to a point where what we're doing in threat modeling doesn't impact the actual development. Well, development starts ultimately when I take a user story out of the backlog and I add it to a sprint or whatever. So why can't we work with our business people, bring them into that shared model of responsibility, right? And ask them to be a part of threat modeling. They understand the business implications better than anyone else anyway. And they're the ones writing these user stories. So if we take our threat modeling information, we do simple threat modeling based only on that user story, not the whole system. Just look at the user story. And now we build that information into the user story. Now we've accomplished our goal because now you've told the developer, here's what could possibly go wrong. And now you know how to design controls to fix it.
That's awesome. Yeah. So is a user story the same as a user journey, or is that something else that marketing people do? I'm only asking for my own edification because I know that there's a lot of different methods to call it, like user experience or what have you. The place I'm working at right now called them user journeys. So I didn't know if it was the same.
Usually when I've heard the term user journey, that's kind of a broader aspect. User journey is usually this is how they're going to start. They're going to flow through a system. They're going to do this, this, this. User stories tend to be a little more granular in that, I want this feature added so that this user can do this. So user goes to this part of the app. They do this, this action occurs, and this is the result. And so user stories tend to be very small, compact. And that's why just doing threat modeling, even just within that little piece, now we're continually improving. Did we address all the threats across the entire application and build controls for all of them? No. But each time we're adding a new element or we're changing something, now we're starting to analyze it for those threats, and we're starting to build the necessary controls that are going to address them. And for developers, all the information they need is right there. So as they're formulating in their minds and their designs what they're going to do, because again, typical CI/CD, we're not doing a whole lot of design work here. This is mostly happening in developers' heads, and they're going. Now they've at least got that context. They understand, oh, okay, we're leveraging this function. I really need to defend this, or we're going to be using this piece of data that the business is telling me is crucial data that I have to defend. I might want to think about where I'm storing it in the database, and can it be encrypted, or should I be using a particular hash value, or whatever those controls might look like. Now the developer has that knowledge on the front end, and it's easier for them just to develop it. It doesn't really slow them down, because it goes into their approach to how they're going to code that particular user story.
Right. I was wondering, you were talking about, creating user stories, and they're very granular. I was thinking about, because, I'm working on my freaking PMP, taking a boot camp this weekend to try to pass that and figure out when I'm going to do my test. And a lot of the tools and techniques we use for that is like what if scenarios. Are there questions that we could suggest they ask themselves, like, what if a user does X? What if a user does Y? Are there questions that they can ask that, in lieu of actually doing a full, threat model or something like that?
Yeah, and I kind of alluded to them, and it's even more basic than that, right? Because part of the problem with Stride and with some of that too is it's very technically focused, right? I mean, if you look at Stride, it's spoofing and denial of service, all these, very technical things. I don't care. If I'm talking threat modeling, I don't care that it's a denial of service. That comes later. That's when, when I think about the technical implementations, what controls I need, that's when I think about that. When I'm thinking about the threats, I'm worried about what is the critical pieces that someone's going to try to do something bad with, or steal, or, first of all, what are the threats? They might steal something from me. They might interrupt some form of business. They might expose certain data. They might commit a fraudulent transaction, right? None of these are technical things. These are all very businessy understandings of just functionality and what this functionality means in terms of those items. So first of all, just asking your business people to define that. What are those threats? And putting it into that very simple terminology, because now they don't have to learn some big, technical threat chart or anything like that may or may not be their real core competency as a business analyst. And then just ask them to identify things like what's critical in terms of, is there critical information that we're processing? Is there a critical functionality here that would be apt for fraudulent transactions, things like that? Again, still not getting technical, still thinking about it at a functional level. Now, when you hand that to an architect or you hand that to a developer, let them make that translation to, all right, here's how this is going to flow into what I'm designing. This is how I'm going to set controls for that part of what I'm going to be creating or changing or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I love that you're trying to make that simple. I love that, we can say, okay, what would give a user a bad experience, or what would give a user, something that would be negative or cause harm to the company. So yeah, you were talking about that. I think we just need to make sure that they don't try to consider things like load times or colors or something to be what we're considering in terms of security. Because I know some of them want, we need to make this blue polka dotted instead of something else. Right. So yeah, I love that. So yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting that it's just like you turn it over to the business people tomorrow and say, hey, do this. No, you want to set up some training. You want to set up a process for how you're going to approach this. What data are you going to ask them to collect, and then show them how you want to collect it. That's always going to be crucial, but now you've brought them into the security conversation. So you've taken that shared responsibility from just devSecOps and added business to it. And I at one point on a podcast made the unfortunate mistake of using the term biz devSecOps. And I kind of wish I had never said it because it's actually, I've heard it in other places now too. And every time I hear it, I'm like, no, we don't need to just keep adding new terms onto that. Let's just think about shared responsibility and forget about what we call it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, having the business people care about that stuff I would say probably be an 80-20 rule. If they can knock that down and get, some of those controls in place or help you understand the controls, and maybe security people don't understand the function of the application. So we're likely to go, well, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, Y might actually break it or make it less useful to the customer, which is going to hurt the business, which is something that the business people kind of push back on security because we're like all or nothing. So that would help us also understand and negotiate better security controls. Okay, we can't do full on all of this, but then we need to understand what mitigating controls or what moats and crocodiles we need to put into place to make it better. So I appreciate that. That's great. I appreciate that. Let me see. I'm trying something new with Audacity. Forgive me. I'm trying these label things in the audio, so that way I know where things start. So some of the other stuff that I saw you were doing on Twitter dealt with deepfakes. And so for those folks that may be living under a rock, what is a deepfake?
Okay. So yeah, we'll start with the definition, right? So deepfake, when I say that, what I'm referring to is any form of artificial media that's created using a deep learning neural network. So that artificial media can be just images. It can be audio, or most well-known right now, when we say deepfakes, most people think of videos. People might remember a video from 2018 where Barack Obama was shown, I think he said Trump was a dumbass. He said something about Ben Carson, whatever. And it turns out that, okay, that wasn't Barack Obama. It was Jordan Peele doing the voice and an actor sitting in to look like Barack Obama. And then they used this deep fake technology to put Barack Obama's face on this actor. And so there's been a number of different notable ones since as well, but that's what most people think of when they hear the term deepfake.
Right. So one reason I wanted to discuss this was because in the U.S., it is an election year, even though we're dealing with all of the COVID corona stuff, what people like to call the new normal, and it may be around for a while depending on who you listen to and which medical expert, but it is an election year and people are looking at more than ever media because just to get information on what's going on. And we have heard on the news and in certain articles where disinformation campaigns are occurring from people in other countries. I don't know why, but they're doing it because that's their bread and butter. You spoke at RSA about this. Not only is it a political threat, but you're talking about business threats in this case. Can you tell us a little bit about why you think there might be business threats dealing, using deepfake technology?
Yeah, I mean, the political side of it, I think, like you said, that's what a lot of people think of, too, when they think of deep fakes. It's been talked about, the fact that there was this video of Barack Obama. There's been other videos that have been done with our current president. There's been a lot of that. So people have kind of understood that. But what's gone overlooked is how this type of technology could be used against businesses. And certainly, if you're going to go talk at RSA, political is great, but let's talk about 90% of the people there represent businesses and are worried about how to defend them. And so, there's a number of different, thoughts here. So first of all, just from business executive perspective, and how could I use this to attack a business executive? We saw there was a video done last year of Mark Zuckerberg talking about all of the privacy stuff and how he basically making it clear he didn't care about privacy, which I guess most people probably wouldn't argue with. But in any event, there was a momentary effect from that. And so there's a couple of things you could do here with attacking high profile executives. First of all, just simple extortion. Deepfakes really got going in video in particular in the porn industry. Where does a lot of technology get its start, right? If it's worth having, it probably was used in porn at some point. And quite honestly, that's what happened with deepfakes. And so, is it really that far fetched to create a deepfake of a high profile executive in some compromising situation with somebody? Yeah, obviously not. That would be very doable. And could we get around that? Would it be proven eventually that was a deep fake? Sure, but would the damage already be done? Probably. And most executives, it's a lot easier to deal with an extortion situation than to try to deal with disinformation later. We can expand this into something that I've coined a term, I guess, outsider trading. And so we think about short stocks, shorting stocks, and how we do that with insider trading. So consider the scenario where my favorite is to pick on Tesla. So Tesla is going to launch their next model. We'll call it the Model Q. And the night before they're going to have their big launch party, Elon Musk is going to be up on stage and smashing windows with sledgehammers or something. The night before he gets up there, viral video goes around the internet of Elon Musk in a private meeting with a small number of shareholders or something, telling them about all the problems with the line, how the car is going to be delayed, this or that or the other thing. Well, what's going to happen? The stocks are going to drop. The right people, if someone's responsible for this, could easily buy up now those short shares at that reduced price. Comes out that it's a deep fake, everything gets delivered fine, and stock prices recover. I've just made a really healthy profit in a matter of days. So it becomes kind of that same scenario. And now if I just extrapolate that, okay, great, I can do that to a large enterprise organization. What about entire markets? Could I grab an entire industry and crash like the oil market or something? Or worse yet, what about whole economies of small nations? There's a lot of implications here that aren't just political. And that was really the subject of my talk at RSA, because I've seen so much talk about the political aspects. No one's really thought or talked much about the other side of this, and that is just what does this really mean to us from a business perspective?
Right. Well, so the problem that I see with the deep fakes and someone shorts a stock because they know that this deep fake is going to go out and the stock is going to drop a couple bucks, so they can short it, or it's so temporal. By the time they find out about it, the crime's already been committed. So it's not like you can stop that from happening, and anybody apparently can make these things, right?
So yes and no, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. There's two different questions you've brought up there, and I don't know if you realize it, but so the first question, let me actually address the first one. The first one is just the situation of how do we deal with this when they do exist. And as I said at RSA, it's not a technology problem, it's a human problem. Because when it comes down to it, like you said, once the information's out there, how do we bring it back? There's that problem of disinformation, and disinformation is very hard to combat. So when I talk to businesses, my suggestion is you need to be prepared, not even just with deepfakes, but with disinformation in general, with a plan for how do you respond to disinformation. So building that into your IR plan, treating a disinformation outbreak, if you will. God, hard to use that term right now. But if you have this disinformation gets out there about your organization, how do you deal with it? How do you have those friendlies in the media who will get the right message out there for you? How do you make sure that you communicate? What are the ways that we have to combat misinformation? So that's the first piece. Now, the good news is, like you mentioned, anyone can create this. Well, yes and no. The technology is out there, it's available. And this goes to a lot of the research I've been doing lately, which is just what does it take to create a deepfake? And there's some simple apps out there. First of all, there's a website that you can go to called deepfakesweb.com, I believe. And you go in there and you upload some videos and some pictures, and it creates a deepfake for you. The results I've gotten out of it, not believable at all. Like, it's very clear when you look at it that, like, all right, you can see the masking of how the face was cut out, and you can see a lot of the deformations and distortions that are in play, very clearly fake. So I got to playing then with an app called Face Swap, which you can install on a Windows box or on a Linux box. It all runs within Python, uses the CUDA libraries from NVIDIA. So if you've got an NVIDIA card, it is spectacular what you can do with this thing. It's super cool. But the most recent sessions, so I've run a couple sessions of this now trying to create videos. And even in the most recent one, okay, I ran training for almost 48 hours. So that's the part where the deep learning neural network, or what we call a generative adversarial network, which is what actually is responsible for creating these, is trying to learn, how do I take face A and turn it into face B, to really oversimplify that. And I ran that training for 48 hours on a dedicated GPU. Okay. I mean, I actually bought an NVIDIA K40 GPU card, which is, it's got no video output. It's designed just for doing deep learning. And for 48 hours, I let this thing run, and I got really, really good response. It was showing good values that it was really learning well. And even then, when I generated the video, it was still pretty clear that this was DeepFaked. I mean, there were things that showed up. So what I've already started to learn is it takes a significant amount of effort to create these. And indeed, in talking with some folks, what I'm finding out is some of the videos that you're seeing that are pretty convincing, well, they've got teams of people that are working on first just the facial extractions, which is what you have to do before you even get to the point of the training, just setting it up so that the facial recognition alignments are correct, because those come out almost never perfect. Then the training, you have to go through that. And then whatever your target video, you have to do all that same thing again. And even then, after they're done with all of that, they're still literally going frame by frame and cleaning up artifacts and things in order to create this end video that looks believable. So think about that in terms of 30 frames a second. You're talking about 1,800 individual images that you have to sit there and go in and edit. So how long does that take you as a human being to do that? You need a team of people if you're going to do that with any speed. So that's kind of where we're at with the technology right now. Now, the neural networks are getting better. They're getting faster. Obviously, doing this on a single GPU card in my computer here, yeah, it's high powered, but you know what? I mean, there's still much expansion I can do. You go to a cloud environment, hey, you can spin up, entire virtual machines of GPUs. And that's where you start to see as well that you can start to automate more of the pieces of this and speed it up.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've seen the same thing with Wi-Fi cracking of passwords and stuff. People trying to do it locally. It took forever with, the GPUs or the CPU that you had. And then Amazon came out with GPU instances, and, now you can crack thousands of millions of passwords a second or hashes a second doing so. So that's why you're seeing things like SHA-1 no longer being, useful, because the computational power is there. But so what you're saying is it still takes a fairly large render farm to get a realistic Steve Buscemi on Jennifer Lawrence's body.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if it's a targeted attack, something like that, yeah, people could do it. You can spin up that instance in Amazon, add a bunch of V100s to it, as far, those are your GPUs. Spin up a bunch of NVIDIA V100s and pound this thing through, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost a lot, and it's going to take a lot of time, and you need a lot of material still to do this. I mean, there's some of the models are getting really good and can do it with a fairly small amount of source material, but you still need that material. You need a lot to make this happen, and it's not cheap. If you're going to try to do it on your own on the cheap, the results aren't good. That's kind of where we're at. Now, obviously, it's going to continue to improve. We see lots of research being done on how to detect these things. We've even got research out there that they're using different methodologies to actually prevent the ability to create this media, because especially in the video world, it's all based on facial recognition. And so if we can defeat the facial recognition, it kind of destroys the whole process.
So are we talking like with printers where they digitally tag the ink or something like that, so you can tell where the the printer is? Are they digitally tagging the video so that they know where the potential source of the video came from, or what does that look like? I mean,
so we are, yeah, so we are seeing that. There's research being done. How do we authenticate a video? So they're looking at digital watermarking with hashes, where the camera itself would embed that in the video. To prevent the deep faking, basically what they're doing is they're inserting what they call perturbations into the images. So basically, if you create this digital noise that's really not perceptible visually to the eye, the algorithms that are doing the facial recognition, they pick up on it and they start, they can't identify the correct face and they start giving all sorts of really strange results. And so now, of course, that would require that every picture of you on the internet has to have that treatment done. Otherwise, people can grab images and they can still do it. So it's not realistic, but it's interesting if you think about, again, high profile characters like, okay, every picture of the president has to be treated this way or something. Yeah, you might have an opportunity to do something like that. But what's fascinating about it is just kind of the way that these things work is every time you get better at detection, you basically now helped train the side that's generating this. And that's the nature of how these GANs work. I don't want to get into the whole nitty gritty of that here, but it's basically, that's why they call it adversarial network, because you have these two sides that are constantly working against each other. One that's trying to create media that the other one is going to believe is real. And so that they feed back to each other. And, as one gets better, the next gets better, and it just keeps going.
Yeah. Does it depend on the difficulty or the complexity of the video? Is somebody who's doing something that requires, a lot of action or head movements or something, is it easier to fake something if they're just sitting there kind of talking like this and it's, if there's not a lot of movement, is it depending on complexity in that respect, or is it that difficult regardless?
No, it's definitely more difficult the more movement there is, especially if there's different facial angles, a lot of profile, because now those models have to not only learn a frontal facial representation, they need to learn, both the profiles as well. And in fact, some of the models just aren't even really geared for that. They're really geared for just, a frontal unobstructed face view. The other thing that's tough is if there's any form of panning. So if the video pans in and out, what happens is you start to see, as you zoom in closer to the subject, you'll start to see resolution issues and some of the different deformations and distortions that are a result. And that has to do with when you're doing the training. Basically, what it has to do is it has to reduce all of the training pictures to the same size image and learn from those and then bring them back up. And obviously, the bigger that training image is, the more horsepower you need to process it and learn from it in the first place. So a lot of the early ones, it was a 64 by 64 pixel image that they used for faces. Then it went to 128. Now we're seeing, in face swap, you can do 56. You can even go up to 384, which is the most recent one I did was 384 by 384. But you still, if you're thinking about HD video and a close-up on someone's face, even 384 pixel square is not going to cover the whole face. So you're still talking about having to enlarge and again, form the face to make it fit the other face and so forth.
Huh. That's interesting because if I'm watching a world leader or something and they're giving a press conference and they're not moving too much, it would almost make sense if you wanted to reduce the chance of deep fakes to have the camera slowly panning in, a little bit and panning out and kind of, moving it, like this to kind of confuse any chances or, what you're doing is you're increasing the overhead needed to actually create a proper deep fake, I would imagine, in that case.
Well, I mean, the issue is in that situation, that would probably be your source material. Mm-hmm. So that's the material where it's just going to take those pictures and it's going to reduce them all to the same size anyway. It's really the where the panning and other things come into play is when you're trying to produce, it's the target material that you're using. So that video you're trying to create. Mm-hmm. So the example I use in my talks is someone took a scene of from I can't think of it now, as a Fatal Attraction with Sharon Stone.
Hmm.
Um, and they put Steve Buscemi's face on Sharon Stone.
No.
And it's that infamous scene too, right? The one that made it rated X
Right.
essentially.
Right.
But so from far away, it looks very convincing at Steve Buscemi. But then there's a part where they zoom really close on her face, and so when it's Steve Buscemi's face, you can see, first of all, you see all the pixelization of that image that had to be expanded. You see everywhere that it's distorted in like the cheeks and stuff. So where you're trying to do something like that, it becomes far more difficult. If you have control of the target video, like you're just trying to create a video of someone sitting at a desk like they did with Barack Obama, now you can control that there's no panning going on. But that also limits what you can create in terms of a video. And so, all of that does come into play.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't want to use the attribution tag, but it's fairly well off organizations or criminal organizations or whatever that would typically right now still be the ones bankrolling these kinds of things. And the extortion angle works pretty well, I would imagine. Like you said earlier, if you could extort business leaders, one, it's got to be worth the tens or twenties of thousands of dollars to be able to do so. But so deepfakes are still in the realm of like well organized adversaries in this case.
Yeah, most likely at this point. Like you said, just given the costs and what it would take to get that level of technology pushed behind it. Yeah, you're looking at organizations who are really investing their time and money, or attackers that are investing their time and money to go after somebody. So I don't think we're at a point yet where we have to worry about people like creating, for instance, revenge porn.
Mm-hmm.
To get back at an ex. That's probably a little ways off yet. But again, the technology continues to get better and better, so it's only probably a matter of time before that's a reality that we're facing too.
Okay. It's getting to top of the hour. I want to discuss some things. Let me. I'm really trying to do that. When we have more people on the show, I'll be able to not, mouth these things and, pull the curtain aside. So with the advent of all of the social distancing and what have you, a lot of educational opportunities have picked up in the last couple of weeks. I mean, I've been posting stuff on our Slack about free online courses. Marcus Carey, who we had on a couple of weeks ago, was doing some prep courses for Security Plus and Net Plus, which I thought was great. Miss Berlin's doing some stuff on her Zooms for mental health issues and, doing some virtual conferences. You're doing some virtual conferences too, correct?
Yep. Yeah, I think, first of all, it's been really impressive, right? I think the whole industry has kind of responded, because we did lose a lot of educational opportunities with all the conferences that are canceled. I mean, that's kind of our bread and butter, how we get, new information out. And I've seen a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. Tanya Janka is another one who's really spun up some work. But, as far as for me, one of the things that I'm doing, I'm helping organize a online conference that's really focused, kind of taking that DevSecOps message and trying to bring all those people together into one conference. We're calling it allthetalks.online. So that's the website, allthetalks.online. But it's a 24-hour conference that ultimately the proceeds of it will be going to benefit charity. So first of all, tickets are free. Certainly there is the opportunity to, make an optional donation to the charities. And these are health charities that are actually help provide supplies and other things to fight this current pandemic. And then we've got sponsors as well. But one of the things we wanted to do, not only do we want to draw in people from developer roles, from operational roles, containers and so forth, and then obviously the security aspect of it, but we're also really focused on making it very interactive. So, it's going to be talks followed by open interaction periods where not only do you get to ask questions and whatever of the speaker, but really interact with your peers as well, where everybody's able to kind of talk about what they just heard. How does it apply to them? What are they doing about it? However, whatever that conversation turns into. having kind of a facilitated conversation after the talk, where now that conversation might have happened between a couple people in the hallway can now happen in that virtual space. We're bringing in some other things to try to make it more like a regular conference too. I know that there's a comedian who's going to do some stuff. We'll have some we're planning 5 tracks. So there's going to be there's a Java track, a JavaScript track, a devSecOps track, containers and cloud native. There's a security track. I feel like I missed one, but maybe not. And then, across those, we'll have a couple keynote talks. We should be announcing speakers any day now. In fact, I'm sure probably by the time this airs. But the conference is April 15th. Our CFP is open through April 1st. Definitely encourage people to check it out. Again, it's a free conference, so you can come and go as you like. We'll have other cool events. We're looking at possibly doing a sticker swap because, stickers, like everybody's supplies are running short. We're not going to conferences and getting stickers. Come on, stickers are important. That's all the talks online. I was scheduled to speak at B-Sides Atlanta this weekend. And so I know that they have gone entirely virtual with that as well. So I'll be sharing some more of my ideas around the threat modeling at that conference. And then another one that just actually came up here in the last 2 days. I was supposed to speak at a conference in Milwaukee called CypherCon. I was going to be delivering a keynote on some of the deepfake technology there. And so when that canceled, one of the co-founders of that conference started working with some other folks, and they created this one called infosec Oasis. And what's unique about infosec Oasis is that they're going to be delivering it with virtual reality technology. So if you have a VR headset, you're going to be actually able to go into your VR world and experience this in a VR environment with other people who are also in a VR environment. Now, the good news is they're working with Alt VR, and Alt VR also provides a 2D experience. So you don't have to have, an $800 VR headset to be a part of this. Registration is free, so anyone can attend. But that's going to be an interesting one too. And I believe the date on that is April 18th, if I'm not mistaken. I'll be speaking at it. Dave Kennedy, Jason Street, Grifter. I know they're all announced that they'll be speaking there as well. So really good selection of speakers for that one too.
Okay. Very cool. And all of these have CFPs, except I'm sure B-Sides Atlanta has been locked. So there's been a lot made, and I don't mean to go back to security because I kind of wanted to wrap this up, but one of the big things that somebody latched onto this week on Twitter was that the very thing where we're using Zoom has some privacy issues. When everybody's at work from home, everybody has to do meetings somehow. It's either Teams or it's Zoom or it's Blue Jeans or it's, God help you, Cisco WebEx or something like that. Should we be looking at terms and conditions of privacy and privacy things, when we're implementing these? Because a lot of companies who may not have worked from home before, or and I didn't really want to go this route because it seems like every podcast is like, "Oh, what are you doing to work at home?" But what should a security person or a company look at in terms of web conferencing software before they actually implement it? Because there's probably a lot of companies out there that are just throwing up a bunch of stuff and going, okay, now work from home, and be damned the consequences.
Oh, and that's absolutely a concern, first of all, right? I mean, there are a lot of companies who are thrust into having to support work from home who haven't.
Right.
My personal opinion, shame on those companies for not having looked at this sooner. There are too many companies who just simply didn't want to invest in it because they were afraid, they didn't know how to manage it, whatever. So they never really pursued it when they could have. And they had employees who certainly could have worked from home. So now they're stuck in a situation where they're thrust into it, but they're in it regardless,
Right.
Whatever they could have, should have, would have done, we're there now. And yeah, I think that it is important that we're looking at the privacy of the technology that we're using. The big thing that happened with Zoom a while ago, this was, I think, like mid to late last year, was, it was discovered that part of their software install a web server on your box without you knowing. And
I remember that.
The really damage, I mean, as if that wasn't bad enough, and they were using that for updates and whatnot. The really bad part was that when you removed the software, it did not remove the web server. And so I know, Zoom took a pretty hard hammering. This was shortly after they IPO'd last year. So I think that was like middle of the year. And, so that does bring up some concerns, right? What is happening with that? And all of these platforms have that. They have that concern of, holy cow, think about the amount of data they have. They all do recording, most of them to a cloud environment. Zoom at least gives you the option. You can record it locally or to the cloud. I know some others where, you don't have a choice. It records to their cloud and they just send you an email and say, here, download your recording afterwards. In fact, you mentioned one of them. So, you do need to look at it. You need to look at its ability to support, does it support single sign-on with your organization? How can you defend it from simple things like multi-factor? How are you going to make sure that people are not reusing passwords? All the standard stuff, right?
Right.
I mean, none of it's really rocket science. But the privacy side of it is important. And unfortunately, there's not a good way to really assess the full privacy of these. We can look at their privacy policies, and we should understand what's in those and what data they're collecting. But what we've seen is that all too often, privacy policies, things like that just don't matter because people don't follow them anyway.
Yeah.
So being aware, taking a look. I mean, I think if you're using reputable software, that's about your best option at this point. Zoom is very widely used, as you noted. Everybody who I've been working with, like you said, I mean, everybody's going to Zoom right now. I think partially because it's a little bit lighter weight of a package and it's a little easier to get going than something like a WebEx or a GoToMeeting or some of the larger, more quote unquote enterprise packages that unfortunately that enterprise tag seems to come with enterprise complexity.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we still use Zoom. We've been using Zoom for the past 3 years, and it seems to work out fairly well. My thing with the Twitter was, I didn't want to say, well, we've got enough stuff going on in the world without having to also pile onto this. But my thing was, it must have been a boring day for somebody because they actually read the terms and conditions. This isn't something that's just brand new. When they were reading the terms and conditions or privacy policy, that was in there in black and white, but everybody was just throwing it up there because nobody actually reads those things for whatever reason. I just wondered what the impetus was for them to just go ahead and start, talking about that issue. And yeah, they do need to release a transparency report, and I hope they do that. But it's not like they were hiding it. They just decided to not highlight it. And I think a lot of companies do that. And, you'd be surprised what happens if you actually read your terms and conditions or your privacy policies and statements about, how much of that data is actually being shared versus not being shared. And
the thing you have to remember with privacy policies, and I do question people on this, when they read a privacy policy and they freak out about what it says, my first question to them is, have you ever written one? Because I can tell you right now, having had to write a number of privacy policies, it is not an easy task. And trying to, you have to make sure that you account for any possible scenario with how you will legitimately use that data. And sometimes that does require wording things in a way that is a little more open than you would want it to be. But it may not have anything to do, people see this in a privacy policy and like, oh, wow, they left this open, so they could be doing this, this, and this. We don't know if they are or not. We just speculate that they could be.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that clause may be worded that way because of something completely different that really, their intentions are 100% good and above board. But all of this stuff has to be included in there because it's got to be GDPR compliant. It's got to be CCPA compliant. It's got to be defensible in court because all that stuff you're putting into a legal document now. Right. So yeah, writing a privacy policy is not easy. So if you've never experienced what it's like to write a privacy policy, I don't really believe you're the right person to be interpreting a privacy policy. It's good for you to understand. It's good to ask questions. Don't get me wrong. It is definitely very good. But to to explode it into, oh my God, this is the most horrible thing ever because it's worded obscurely or abstractly. We need to consider more of the full context of that before we get too upset about it.
100%. Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I appreciate your insight. I didn't mean to go down that road. We didn't even plan on talking about that. But yeah. Alyssa, thank you for coming on. People might want to continue discussing these things with you. And of course, I hope they go to allthetalks.online and B-Sides Atlanta. How would they contact you if they wanted to discuss more about DevSecOps, privacy, Sneak, anything?
Sure. Yeah. And I love the way you put that because it's exactly how I end my talks. Like, let's continue this conversation, please. Twitter's the easiest way. Alyssa M_infosec. So it's ALYSSAM_infosec is where you'll find me on Twitter. That's the handle. If you want LinkedIn, hey, I'm actually surprisingly active on LinkedIn too. I do interface with a lot of people there as well. So then it's just, it's linkedin.com/in/Alyssa M-infosec. So that's all it changes. Instead of an underscore, it's a dash. So yeah, by all means, I would love to have people, follow me, hunt me down. My DMs are open on Twitter. I say that and I probably regret it. But yeah, my DMs are a mess all the time, but I keep them open because I do like to be able to work with people and to talk to different people and hear what they have to say. So
fantastic. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Man, we'd have you on every week if, we get cool stuff like this. I love talking about all these various things. So it was very much appreciated.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having me on. I was super excited when the opportunity came up. So definitely very, very thrilled to be here, and I appreciate that.
Awesome. So you can follow all of us on Twitter. The Brakesec team, Ms. Berlin. You can find her on Twitter at InfoSyster, INFOSYSTIR. Mr. Betcher is Betcher Pwned, BOETTCHERPWNED. The official Brakesec Twitter is actually Brakesec, BRAKESEC, and I'm on Twitter. You can just follow me at Brian Brake. We have a TPub store, so if you want to go and grab a T-shirt or something, if you don't have laundry or something and you want to grab a T-shirt, they'll send you one. You can get some Brakesec swag, not just T-shirts, but stickers and coffee mugs. They'll pretty much print anything you'd like and put our logo on it. So you can go to tpublic.com/users/BDS podcast. We have a YouTube channel. I just upgraded our SoundCloud because apparently we went over the free tier. So now we're fully premium-fied, $12 a month for, ultimate SoundCloud or what have you. So hopefully it'll store our recordings forever. All the links in the show notes will point you to the necessary places for that. We're also on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. We have a YouTube channel. Our Slack is going gangbusters. A lot more people in there now, obviously, because work from home and people, bored and needing things to do. So if you want to join us on our Slack, go and send us a tweet, DM to Brakesec, or you can go to bdspodcast.podcast@gmail.com and send us an email, and we'll invite you in there. We do gatekeep, but only to make sure that you're not a Russian bot or something like that. Thank you to all of our Patreon members. Your donations every month go to help us with hosting fees, domain registration, Zoom fees, because we're using the Zoom way a lot more than we used to, which is great. You're directly helping us. If you're having issues financially or something, we had somebody email us today and said, hey, I can no longer support your Patreon because, got a tenuous financial situation. That's fine. Podcasts will always be free. Slack is always going to be free. So don't sweat it. And, hopefully once everything clears up and we get back to somewhat normal, you'll be able to help out and do whatever. So if you can donate on Patreon, we appreciate it. But if not, it's all right. appreciate everybody listening, and please leave feedback on the various platforms, Google Play Store, iTunes, Apple Podcasts. That gives us more exposure, gets Miss Miller's message out there, gets our message out there, gets more people listening, and spreads the education. So we appreciate that. All right. Well, Alyssa, hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and good luck on speaking this weekend. I know you're going to do great because you're awesome, and I hope to be in the crowd watching this weekend.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Yeah, stay safe out there. It's a crazy world we're in at the moment.
Yep. All right. Well, that was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Have a great week. Be kind to one another. Stay safe and stay healthy. Take care of yourselves because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon. Awesome. Oh, man, that was great. Oh, my goodness.